We're going to talk about your strategy, think, engage, explain. Now, I have a K-12 background, so I'm very familiar with think, pair, share, where I would have my students think about what we just did and get in a pair and talk to each other, and then we would share out what were your conclusions, what were your takeaways. Tell us, what is think, engage, explain, how is it related to think, pair, share, and what has been your
Sure.
experience with it?
I learned Think, Pair, Share, I think, at a workshop, and I tried it out and loved it. It was one of the first new change one things that I brought to my own teaching. But it takes planning, and it takes care and attention to do it well. And I could design those things. They didn't always come out as well as I wanted. And and I'm often not a great planner for in-class exercises. So I wasn't using them nearly as well as I wanted to. So as usual, I thought, okay, how can I simplify this down to a sort of simpler, easier way for me to do this that takes less thought and less planning? I'm very much into efficiency in teaching. If something takes far more time to get you a modest benefit, it's not worth it. What I like is teaching techniques that once you learn them, don't take a lot of time and they're easy to do. So Think, Engage, Explain simplifies it. All I do is ask the class to think about a question or a problem, or even just think about what we just covered and explain it to your neighbor. And then at that point, I can ask somebody to talk about an answer to the question, and sometimes I take a few of those, and then it turns more into a think, pair, share. But much of the time, I just end it with, do you have any questions? That is something, for example, that if I've just gone over something really complicated, and I know there's going to be confusion, because there always has been in the past, and nobody asks a question, after my 8 seconds, even if I've stretched that to maybe 15 seconds, I say, okay, I'm sure there are questions. So I want you to think about what we just covered, explain it to your neighbor, then I'm going to ask again if you have questions. And that invariably brings me thoughtful questions. Part of it is, if it's a really complex topic, often the students don't know how to ask a question about it. They don't know how to get entry into what their question should be. Or they haven't had a chance to really absorb it and even know if they have a question. They don't know it well enough to even know that. Whereas if they've had to explain it to their neighbor, they now have had enough chance to process to realize, wait, this part didn't make any sense to me, or I'm missing something. And I think it also makes it socially easier to ask a question. One of the things I often say is, explain it to your neighbor and see if they have questions. It makes it a lot easier to ask a question because it might be your neighbor's question. You're not exposing yourself potentially to ridicule, or it's a shared question. You both had it. So you're much more confident knowing, okay, somebody else had the same question. And it makes it really simple. The thing I love about it is it doesn't take any planning. I can just notice I'm not getting any questions. I've also used it as a way to wake up a class. The class has been going for a while. I notice some people not paying attention. Maybe there's a few people in the front row with their eyes closed. And I say, all right, we just covered X. I want you to think about it and explain it to your neighbor. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to post a summary slide up on the screen. So if you need to, you can check it. But if you can do it without the summary slide, just go ahead and explain it to your neighbor. And so I'll do that, 30 seconds, post it up on the screen. And with any of these, I'm paying attention to both the sound level in the room and watching to see, are people talking and what proportion of the people are actually seeming pretty intense or animated or whatever. In other words, pretty focused. And I'm looking for ones who have paused, which may mean, okay, they're starting to go off topic and talk about what they did last weekend, things like that. It's usually a couple of minutes. It's a lot faster than think, pair, shares are, which I like as well. It doesn't take as much class time because the share is the part that takes the most class time. The share is also the most stressful time for me because the students may come up with odd or poor answers and I have to somehow figure out how to re-explain them or make sure there's no misconception but not make them scared to ever say something again and all of that, the think, engage, explain doesn't make me deal with any of those things. So it fits anywhere. I can use it to wake up a class. It's always good reflection time. Once again, they're starting to build memory traces. By having to recall it, they're starting to build memory traces. The reason I wait 30 seconds before putting the slide up on the screen is I want them to struggle with trying to do it without looking at the slide. Because that's their best way of learning, and that also helps them understand, oh, I don't know it well enough, I need to practice it. And I'll even tell students sometimes, I'm not going to put that up for 30 seconds or a minute because I want you practicing recalling it, because this is the kind of stuff, or maybe this is a topic on which I always ask an exam question, and you need to start building that memory, and you need to know that that memory isn't good enough yet. And you'll find that out by trying to recall it and think about it and explain it and discovering you can't.
And so what are some cautions with this? What can go wrong? How do you mitigate those times when it doesn't?
So the biggest problem is students who are sitting by themselves or who don't engage. So students who are in the back on their own or whatever. And I sometimes, depending on the class, depending on how I feel about it, sometimes I'll have people move near somebody else. Sometimes I'll say, if you prefer not to explain it to somebody else, write it down or make a quick sketch of it or something like that, so that you're at least thinking through it for yourself, and here's why. And I don't think it's essential that they all actually be talking to somebody else. What really matters is that they're actually thinking about it and trying to explain it. And so I want them to be engaged. And so I have some students who I know sit off by themselves because they don't want to engage with anybody else for social reasons or whatever. They just don't want to. And so I like to give them the freedom to be themselves and some flexibility. So I'll make comments like that to say, okay, here's what I want you to do, here's why I want you to do it, and I think it works best if you're talking with somebody else about it, but if you don't happen to be near anybody or you prefer not, here's what I want you to do instead. So that's probably the biggest issue in helping students figure out what to do in that case.
I think that was great.
Yeah. This one, it's one of the reasons why it's one of my big three, is that it's hard for it to go wrong. Pretty much any time I do it, I feel like it works fine.
So we hope you feel inspired to go out and change one thing in your teaching, and we want to hear from you. So please email us at stli@wm.edu. That's STLI@wm.edu if you would like to make an appearance here in Studio 36 or virtually in our virtual podcasting studio.